Welcome to the Sidecar Sync podcast, your home for all things innovation, artificial intelligence, and associations. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Sidecar Sync, your home for content at the intersection of artificial intelligence and the world of associations. My name is Amith Nagarajan.
And my name is Mallory Mejias.
And we're your hosts. And today we have some exciting topics, as always, at that intersection of AI, and we're going to contextualize it with the association side of the intersection. So very excited to talk all about that. How you doing today, Mallory?
I'm doing pretty well, Amith. I'm not going to lie. I was excited for this GPT-5 episode. I had seen the teasers, back in July of this year, 2025, that GPT-5 would be released in August. And so I've been looking forward to this convo. How have you been?
Been well. Got back to New Orleans, which is great. Kids are back in school, which is extra great. And, it's for those of you outside of the southern part of the United States, you're wondering, well, that's kind of weird that you're back in school so soon. It's only kind of mid-August by the time you guys hear this. But it is pretty normal down here. I think most of the South starts around this time of August, but the kids do get out a little bit earlier than the West Coast and the East Coast, where when I was growing up in California, it was always Labor Day to kind of just after Memorial Day. You get out in kind of mid-June typically, but these kids get out, I think, in late May is usually what it is. So, but anyway, doing great. It's always nice to have that happen because then we can kind of get back into a normal routine, but had a great summer up in Utah. So I too have been excited to talk about all the OpenAI topics from last week, GPT-5, of course, and the open source models, and share my perspective because I've done quite a bit of work with both sets of those models since they came out, and our teams have been digging in as well. So have some live feedback that we can share when we get to the right point in the episode. But it's just an exciting time in AI. There's so much going on in the world of artificial intelligence. I also think that associations are really, really, really paying attention to this stuff. We're seeing that certainly at Sidecar with the growth of our association AI professional certification. We've got hundreds of people that have gone through the program already, a few thousand people that are in progress in the program, associations that are signing up as a team all the time, which is super exciting because that results in everyone on their team having access to a great learning experience about AI, obviously, for the association sector. And then also, we had probably, 15, maybe 20 people out in Los Angeles this week. I didn't go myself because I was in transit back home. But ASAE had their annual conference, which we always love to go to. They did a fantastic job, as they always do, and put together a great show for, I believe, about 4,000 association attendees. I'm not sure if that's the total number or if that's the number of association people, but somewhere in that neighborhood. And we had a good number of folks across the Blue Cypress family. And the main takeaway I heard is, people are doing stuff. They're out there, they're experimenting, they're deploying AI. There's lots and lots of use cases. So, mid 2025 is very different than mid 2024, which is very, very exciting and rewarding for us to hear here at Sidecar.
Absolutely. Man, thousands in progress on the AAiP. I feel like every time I get on LinkedIn, I'm seeing not even just one, but a few posts of just got my AAiP, just got my AAiP. So that's been really exciting to see. And Amith, have you heard any specifics from teammates at ASAE Annual who led sessions about how those went, or I don't know, kinds of questions they were asking? I know it just ended, I think maybe yesterday. So we're pretty fresh off the event. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. A number of our folks, I think, flew home yesterday, but it's wrapped up. I think everyone's left or going home, but really positive feedback in terms of session turnout. I know Erica Wrench from the Sidecar team, who's our CMO here at Sidecar, she led a session on AI. And I saw some pictures and it looked like there was literally standing room only. So that is great. And I know there were quite a number of other sessions and talks about AI throughout. So I think from that perspective, it certainly was the topic that was a buzz all over LA.
Yeah, and I saw Andrew Schwartz Crane of Soundpost. He was playing an instrument at his booth. Did you see that on LinkedIn, Amith?
I did. I was really happy to see that. Yeah, Andrew is a really talented musician and technician. So it's interesting how sometimes you find musicians that are also brilliant software engineers, and he is both of those things. So yeah, he's launched a really cool product that's an AI product that helps accountants ensure that the numbers in their accounting system, like NetSuite or QuickBooks or Sage, actually tie back to the source systems, which sounds pretty straightforward. You'd think, well, I have Shopify, or I have WooCommerce, or I have an event registration system like a CVent, and the data should, of course, tie to my accounting system. But something as seemingly simple is, in fact, an extraordinary pain in the butt for most associations for a lot of reasons. And so he's applied some good old fashioned software engineering, but some really cool uses of AI to bring that data in to the accounting system in a novel way that is really going to solve this problem. So he calls this Soundpost's Bridge product, which is all about how to make the accounting data rock solid and to simplify that process. So he was going around the convention center with his violin, getting attention for that. So I think people had some idea what the product was, but it was pretty cool seeing him do that.
I love that. Man, a musician and a software engineer walk into a bar and you get Andrew Schwartz Crane at
That's
Soundpost.
right.
I love it. We'll link to that too in the show notes if any of you all have interest in learning more about Soundpost. But today's kind of a dedicated OpenAI episode. We're going to be diving into two major releases that represent kind of opposite ends of the AI deployment spectrum. Both dropped in August this month, 2025. So first, we'll explore GPT-5, OpenAI's flagship model that takes a radically different approach by automatically handling complexity for you. And then we will look at OpenAI's surprising return to open source with their GPT-OSS models that can run entirely on your laptop. So first and foremost, GPT-5 was released on August 7th, 2025. Unlike previous iterations that required more careful prompt engineering and model selection, GPT-5 is fundamentally changing how we interact with AI. As Ethan Mollick, AI researcher and professor at Wharton School of Business, describes it, this is an AI that, quote, just does stuff. So let's get into some tech specs. First, GPT-5 includes 4 variants. So we've got GPT-5, which is the deep reasoning model, GPT-5 Mini, the lightweight and fast option. We've got GPT-5 Nano, which is ultra low latency, and GPT-5 Chat, which offers advanced multilingual conversation. The context windows, or the amount of text an AI model can remember and process at a given time, supports up to 272,000 tokens for inputs and 128,000 tokens for outputs. In practical terms, this means you can feed it the equivalent of a 400 to 500 page document, and it can respond with up to 200 pages of content. GPT-5 is also multimodal, so that's integrated text, image, and voice processing in relatively real time with architecture ready for native video processing as well. The key innovation here, I would say, is the automatic model selection. So GPT-5 acts as an intelligent router, automatically selecting the appropriate model variant based on task complexity. Simple questions get instant responses from lighter models, while complex problems trigger deeper reasoning capabilities. This theoretically removes the burden of model selection from users, though I did read in Ethan Mollick's summary of his experience with GPT-5 that he can't quite find out how the model is deciding when to use a more complex model and when to use a smaller model, so that might not be quite as up to speed as we think. When given a task, GPT-5 goes beyond answering. It anticipates needs and executes. So ask it to create startup ideas, and it might deliver business plans, landing pages, financial projections, and marketing copy without additional prompting. For associations, this proactive approach might transform your project execution. Amith, I know we've got a lot to unpack here with GPT-5. Reception has been somewhat mixed, but before we get into that, I want to hear what you think is kind of perhaps most impressive about the release of GPT-5.
Well, the first thing I want to say is OpenAI being by far the dominant player in terms of volume. They have 700 million weekly users. I don't know how that compares to Claude or Gemini or other tools that are out there, but clearly the largest one out there. They have therefore the largest challenge. And not so much even just the AI side. There's the AI side, but there's also the product management side. There's the user perspective that comes from having, that diverse, that global of an audience. So you think about it, it's like roughly 1 out of 10 people on the planet, uh, of all of all ages, right, are using ChatGPT at least once a week. That's kind of a staggering thing to think about, and the speed at which they've gotten to that. They'll probably be at 1 billion weekly active users. And I also, at the same time, say that what they've done is, I think, directionally good, but probably a little bit abrupt. A lot of people have said that they miss having access to the model selector. So, as much as people said, oh, the model selector is such a pain, and most users didn't even bother changing it, and therefore they just got the default, which was previously a GPT 4.0, which was a very good model. Um, a lot of people are now saying, well, I really would like to have more control over that. Now, one thing that we have to remember with product feedback, especially people that are on Twitter and Reddit and all these other places, is that these are the power users, or the self-anointed so-called power users. And so they probably speak for less than 1%, probably 1/10 of 1% of the users. And what the average user is experiencing out there with ChatGPT probably won't really be determinable for another month or two, until the OpenAI guys get significant both in product feedback through usage, and perhaps some surveys and research like that. And I think that will really tell a lot. So when you have that wide of a distribution of users, I think directionally what they're doing and making it simpler does make sense. For power users who know what they want and know that, oh, I want to invoke a reasoning model, or I want to invoke a research tool, or I want it to do a web search, we've gotten used to that. And I do think there's value in having access to those individual tools. But at the same time, my sense of it is that over a period of time, most AI will go this way, because there's this proliferation of models and options and power levels and tools. And the vision they have, which they clearly articulated, was it's just a model. It's just not even a model. It's a system that has multiple models in it, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. You just use the thing and get your work done. And I do think most people will find that very attractive. Now, the flip side of it is they have had some challenges. Part of it is the sheer amount of volume they have, people rushing to try it out. It hasn't been quite as fast as they showed in the demos. Of course, the demos, I'm sure they allocated a lot of resources to. And the more deeply technical people have had some issues with it. But I would say that directionally, I think they're going down the right path over the long run, even though they're getting some bumps and bruises right now from the feedback loop.
Have you tried it out yourself?
Yes. I tried it out pretty much immediately, and I was not particularly impressed with it, but for a different reason. So for me, it wasn't about the automatic model selector and this and that. I think that's great, but for the type of things that I do with it, again, that I would put into this category of more technical or more power user realm, it just wasn't particularly smart for a lot of the use cases I was throwing at it. It wasn't notably different than certainly O3 Pro. I think is a better model than GPT-5, because you don't get access to that level of reasoning by default unless you go to the GPT-5 thinking, and then you have to specifically change it. And then, the regular requests that you put into it, I think it's routing some of those to mini and some of those to nano. And those are, they're going to be kind of very basic responses that you're going to get from those much, much smaller models. Now, keep in mind, GPT-5 mini and GPT-5 nano there. I don't know this to be true, but I believe it's probably benchmarking somewhat similar to like the first version of GPT-4 or above. So it's not like it's a dumb model. It's just not at the level of incredible intellect that has been touted. So I haven't tested it a ton as a user in ChatGPT. I'm primarily a Claude user, so ChatGPT to me is more about voice. I am a big ChatGPT user on my mobile phone when I'm taking walks or when I'm driving. And I just got done driving for 30 hours back from Utah, and so I had an opportunity to use ChatGPT 5 through voice mode, and it was really good. The new voice capability is significantly better than 4.0, so that's definitely worth testing.
Okay. I haven't tried GPT-5 voice, but I did a little bit of preliminary testing too. As you all know, if you listened to the pod before, I'm also an avid Claude user, so I mainly use ChatGPT for image generation, but I was somewhat impressed. I have read a note online. I think Ethan Mollick said this first, but if you want to trigger that deeper thinking model, you can just put think harder kind of over and over in your prompting and you'll get there. So I didn't include that. I had a really simple prompt of as if we hadn't formed the Sidecar Sync podcast, like, hey, I want to form an AI podcast for associations. Can you help me think through that? And I did notice the proactive part. So it gave me all these ideas. And then at the end said, do you want me to outline the first 10 episodes? I said, sure. It outlined the first 10 and it said, do you want me to come up with a play-by-play for the first episode, like a full script? So I appreciated that, but I guess it didn't seem so novel. I haven't tested it out for any blog writing purposes, so I'm not really sure how the writing compares. But I don't know. I'm just such an avid Claude user. It would be hard to pull me away from that.
Well, and speaking of Claude for just a second, too, the Claude 4 series, which has been out, for maybe 3 months now, does also have the same capability where the reasoning can get invoked by virtue of the nature of the prompt. You can ask it to think hard, or apparently there's a keyword that you can use, which is ultra think. So when you're talking to
Oh,
Claude, you can say ultra think this, and apparently that puts it in. It's even. I just learned this maybe in the last couple of weeks. It's quite
okay.
funny. But you can do the same thing with Claude, and Claude is able to think more when you tell it to do that. And these are great capabilities. I think this is going to become pretty standard, where the model or the system that houses the model is kind of aware of the complexity of the prompt and the work involved, and therefore puts the necessary amount of resourcing. I don't think any of us are going to be talking about this particular topic in a year, because it'll just be normal that the models automatically scale up and scale down their compute resources based on the nature of the problem. So I think that's again, this is not a negative point of view. I just think
Yeah.
it's exciting for now, and pretty soon it'll be like talking about the fact that you can chat with an AI, which nobody talks about anymore, even though a couple of years ago that was a pretty big thing.
Pretty big deal.
Yep.
Amith, do you think that this leap thus far, and mind you, we're recording this on August 13th, so the model was really just released, and I'm sure it's going to take a few weeks, a few months for people to really push it to its limits. But do you think that the leap to naming it GPT-5 is warranted? Do you feel like thus far it's that impressive?
I think as a system, the combination of capabilities definitely warrant a major version release. I think it's fair. I think that from a developer perspective, it doesn't provide any real significant increase in capability. It is not notably better than the O series models in terms of code generation. I don't think it's any better than Claude 4.1 Opus in terms of code generation, which is a major use case that we are constantly hammering over here. But for ordinary day-to-day use, for various business use cases, I think it is going to be a really powerful tool because of the routing, because of the level of tooling, how they've integrated everything into a single system. But it's again, is it necessarily a release that's about the technology? A little bit. There's some good things they've done, but more than anything, to me, it's about two things. One is simplicity, to make it more accessible to their 700 million, soon to be a billion people, most of whom don't listen to this podcast, or others that are digging deep into AI, and they're using it in a very casual way. So it's really important to make it, if you want to widely and evenly distribute AI's benefit to as many people as possible, got to find a way to make it simple. So I admire and applaud them for doing that. The other part of it is cost. There's two things that are really important to note. Number one, GPT-5, which is the best model, is available to free users in ChatGPT. So you go from, the majority of those 700 million people having access just to the 4.0 model previously, which was the only model available in the free tier of ChatGPT, to now having access to GPT-5, which is the latest, most powerful model. I don't know if they constrain it in some way in terms of how much thinking time you get or whatever, but they have access to it. And so that's a big deal, because you put hundreds of millions of people into a far more powerful model. If you compare 4.0 to 5, it's a pretty big leap. And so that's a big thing, right? And so, especially as ChatGPT, if their brand continues to be what it is now, they're going to have probably a couple billion users within the next year or two. And so you're talking about more and more of humanity having access to AI for the first time with that level of models. So that is a big thing. Of course, the significant benefit accrues to OpenAI if they're able to execute that, because then they become, even further the leader in the space. The other side of it is API access. So this is something that a lot of business folks haven't really paid much attention to, but the cost of API access for the underlying AI models is worth talking about for just a minute. So these models are priced when you access them through API, which means you as a developer don't want to use ChatGPT through the window, through the app, through the browser, but instead you're going to write a program that's going to talk to the model and have it do something for you, oftentimes through an agentic framework or perhaps just writing code that interacts with the model. And there's tons of use cases for this. And so the models are priced based on what we call millions of input tokens and millions of output tokens, which is what it sounds like. So for every million input tokens versus every million output tokens, usually the output tokens are a little more expensive. But to give you an idea, the cost of GPT-5 is way lower than what anyone thought it was going to be. It's around 1/10 the cost of Claude 4.1 Opus. So that's worth noting because all of a sudden GPT-5 is priced. In fact, it's less expensive than some of their older models that are going out. Now, when AI models come out and there's a new generation, usually a vendor will cut the price of the old model considerably. I don't believe that OpenAI did that. In fact, they're just lowering GPT-5 to the point where everybody's like, well, let's just use GPT-5. And GPT-5 Mini is super cheap, but GPT-5 Nano is almost free. It's not free, but it's almost free to use through the API. So that tells you a little bit of what they're trying to do. So one thing they're trying to do is they want to be the default model of choice and they don't want economics to get in the way. The other way to put it is they're trying to use their size to basically clobber everyone else in the space, which is, that's a pretty well proven competitive tactic for the leader in the space to try to do that. So we'll see how that shakes out. I would say this, their model is still extremely slow compared to models that are inferencing on platforms like Grok and Cerebrus, which are fast inference providers that run on alternate technology stacks. So Grok, for example, you can inference models like Qwen 3, which is a very powerful reasoning model that's roughly on par with GPT-4o. That model can inference on Grok at hundreds and hundreds of tokens per second for very little, like much, much less money than GPT-5. GPT-5 Mini, which is probably comparable, is 1/10 the speed of Grok's Qwen 3 implementation. So there are still better choices from an API perspective, even though GPT-5 is super cheap, partly because of speed, but partly because the cost is much lower than Anthropic, but it's not really low. It's like you can get really, really cheap inference if you want to through other sources. So I just wanted to mention that because that is a big, big part of the GPT-5 strategy. It's
Mm-hmm.
basically let's go and own the whole market is the goal.
So it sounds like the two takeaways then for our association listeners are one, the simplicity of the GPT-5 system, and then two, the reduced cost. Is there anything else you think association leaders need to know about this release or need to keep an eye on?
I think that people should keep in mind the same things we've talked about in the past, that new releases from vendors like OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, as exciting as they are, they don't necessarily change your approach to how to deploy AI or associations. So you still have to think deeply about things like governance. Where do you allow your data to go? Just because GPT-5 has all these additional tools for ingesting data and allowing you to do analytics and things like that, do you really want to do that? Do you really want to hand your data over to OpenAI or anyone else for that matter? Or is that something that you want to have a little bit more protection around? And the other thing to be asking is, what is the best tool of use across the association? Should you necessarily standardize on a single tool like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Claude's Anthropic, or should you potentially allow a mixture of tools? Because, like we've talked about in this conversation, different users might benefit from different things. If you're a big multimedia person, you do a lot of image generation, you want to interact with the model through voice, ChatGPT still has a pretty significant advantage. I mean, in the area of image generation, Anthropic's Claude, I don't believe does that at all yet.
No.
But there's other alternatives for that. But having that all in one place is certainly convenient. And voice mode wise, I think ChatGPT's mobile app is still in the lead clearly there. So, but at the same time, for writing quality and for depth and kind of conversational interactions, I think Claude has had an advantage and still does. It's my belief and that of many other people that are in kind of the professional software development world that Claude Opus 4.1 is still superior to GPT-5 in many, many ways, independent of what the academic benchmarks may say. That it's a very, very powerful model for coding. And if you listen carefully to Anthropic's announcement of Claude 4.1 Opus, which was like 2 days before GPT-5 came out, I think it was on the Monday, they said, "Hey, stay tuned because we have a lot more coming." And those guys are pretty understated most of the time. So I would keep an eye out on what they're up to. So all I'm trying to say is don't let your pendulum swing wildly from one vendor to the next. have a thought process around what the use cases are in your association, how you're going to extract as much value from this technology as possible, both internally for your staff's processes, also how do you enable your association to engage with your members through this technology? And so many of those use cases may require improvements to your website, putting in place maybe some custom AI models that allow your members to interact with you. There's lots of different things you can do. The GPT-5 announcement, as cool as it is, should be thought of really as like a milestone on our journey, as opposed to necessarily something that causes you to change any of that.
That's really helpful. As a kind of fun aside, Amith, I was telling you I went on a girls' trip to New York City at this point, maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was really fun. And ChatGPT came up a few times in terms of like, oh, let me ask ChatGPT that, whatever. And I was talking to my friends, and I think I sent them a screenshot of something that I asked Claude. And it's funny because we're in this bubble, and I always assume kind of everybody around me probably knows the same things I do, which is not really a fair assumption. And they said, "What is Claude? Like, you don't use ChatGPT?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, I guess you guys don't listen to the Sidecar Sync podcast." But just a reminder, if you're listening to this, don't assume everybody around you is an avid Claude user too. Even just your awareness of that, is important. Keep it in mind.
Well, choice leads to at least the opportunity to make different decisions. You may ultimately choose to do the same thing that most people are doing, but it at least creates the path for you to consider alternatives. And I think actually just the sheer fact that you go through that process makes you smarter about this stuff, because you're having to, put a little more analytical rigor
Hmm.
into your decision making.
Hmm.
At Sidecar, we know the power of bringing the brightest, most innovative minds out there together in person to learn and grow. And that's exactly what we do at our annual conference, DigitalNow. DigitalNow is a 2.5-day conference bringing Silicon Valley and executive-level content to the association space. We bring in expert speakers from places like Google, Amazon, and the US Department of State to share insights on emerging technologies and how they're reshaping the future of associations. Whether you come solo or bring your team to collaborate and implement together, you'll leave with a clear vision for what's next. Join us November 2nd through 5th, 2025 at the Lowe's Hotel in Chicago. To secure your spot, visit digitalnow.sidecar.ai.
Is your association drowning in disconnected systems and manual processes? Symmetry makes IT less scary, including AI. We're the only firm offering secure, vendor-agnostic AI specifically for associations. Early adopters are already seeing dramatic results. AI implementations can reduce manual tasks by up to 80% and free up over 20 hours per staff member weekly. From managed IT services to revolutionary agentic AI deployment, we transform how associations operate. Ready to lead your industry's AI transformation? Visit Symmetry.com for your free AI readiness assessment. Symmetry, AI strategy and agent deployment for associations. That's Symmetry.com, CIMATRI.com.
If you're listening to this podcast right now, you're already thinking differently about AI than many of your peers. Don't you wish there was a way to showcase your commitment to innovation and learning? The Association AI Professional, or AAiP certification, is exactly that. The AAiP certification is awarded to those who have achieved outstanding theoretical and practical AI knowledge as it pertains to associations. Earning your AAiP certification proves that you're at the forefront of AI in your organization and in the greater association space, giving you a competitive edge in an increasingly AI-driven job market. Join the growing group of professionals who've earned their AAiP certification and secure your professional future by heading to learn.sidecar.ai.
Well, the next part of this episode I'm excited to talk about because OpenAI is finally open. In a surprising move, perhaps, OpenAI has released 2 open weight language models, GPT-OSS 120B and GPT-OSS 20B. Great naming conventions, we love to say, marking their first significant open source release since GPT-2 in 2019. You, as associations, can run powerful open source AI models entirely on your own hardware. No internet connection, no API costs, no data leaving your servers. Keep in mind, open models aren't new, of course. We've seen some incredible releases from DeepSeek, Mistral, and the Microsoft 5 family of models, but it's certainly interesting to see OpenAI enter or technically return to this open arena. So let's talk tech specs. For the GPT-OSS 120B model, it's about 117 billion parameters, and it requires a high-end NVIDIA GPU or a powerful Mac to run it. The 20B model is, of course, lighter weight, and it can run on consumer laptops with about 16 gigabytes or more of memory. As HubSpot's co-founder and CTO Dharmesh Shah excitedly shared on LinkedIn, the entire 120 billion parameter model is just 65 gigabytes, small enough to fit on a $15 USB stick. So he's now running it locally on his MacBook Pro, noting how mind-boggling it is that all this capability, writing prose, possessing knowledge across domains, reasoning through complex problems, fits in such a compact set of numbers. In terms of licensing, they're on Apache 2.0, which is free for commercial use, modification, and redistribution. But OpenAI has not released the actual training data for the models, only the model weights and code. In terms of capabilities, right now they're text only, so no vision and audio, and they support chain of thought reasoning, code execution, and tool use. In terms of performance, we're seeing state of the art on the benchmarks among open models, though interesting to note hallucination rates are around 49 to 53% and higher than closed models. If you want to test this out, you can do an immediate download via Hugging Face and run it completely offline. I would say the power of local AI, according to Dharmesh Shah, who I just mentioned from HubSpot, he says really this is building on the shoulders of giants. So you as associations can customize powerful AI for your specific needs without relying necessarily on external services. Amith, a lot to unpack here. I know you're an avid advocate for open source. Well, let me just hear your initial take before I go into my list of questions.
Well, it's exciting to see OpenAI get back into this game. I think that they've been kind of giving clues to the market for a number of months that they were heading in this direction, but there wasn't really a definitive, statement about timing or what kind of model they'd be putting out there. But a couple things that I think are really important to note. The capabilities of this model in terms of overall performance are very similar to O3 Mini and O4 Mini, which previously were the state-of-the-art reasoning models. Not quite the top tier, which was O3 Pro, but very, very powerful in terms of their overall capabilities. The hallucination rates actually it's an interesting thing to unpack for a minute because you think, well, it's hallucinating half the time. That sounds like a pretty unreliable AI. So this AI is not designed to be a knowledgeable AI by itself. So if you go and ask it typical ChatGPT questions, you will be unimpressed because a good bit of the time it will be wrong. This particular set of models is designed for tool calling. So from an association viewpoint, the question might be then how does that affect us? The main point I would make isn't so much that you should run out and you should download these models and use them yourself. Although you can, especially if you have a MacBook Pro like I do, you can download actually either of those models. I've run the larger one and it works quite well on a fairly new MacBook Pro with a good bit of memory. The more general and important concept is, I think, twofold. First, the fact that OpenAI is in the open source game tells you a few things. Number one, it tells you how important open source is. Number two, it tells you that they felt they were actually on the wrong side of history in terms of not having open source, open weights models. In fact, that's literally what Sam Altman said a few weeks ago, that they're coming down this path because they felt they were on the wrong side of history. Because previously, back in the GPT-3 era, they said that they felt models that were so powerful really couldn't be entrusted in the hands of everyday people because who knows what they would do with them. Essentially, it was kind of the language used a couple of years ago. Whereas now, everyone out there has access to incredibly powerful models. There's the Llama 4 series, which we don't talk about too much. There's the Qwen 3 series. There's DeepSeek. There's Kimi K2 from Moonshot AI, yet another Chinese lab that released something. Mistral just released Mistral 3.1 Medium, which is a very powerful model. So there's a whole bunch of options. And so part of this is just pure market dynamics. If you're not in the open source game, you can't win AI. You have to have a play in the open source game because open source is going to be really, really good for use cases that don't require the absolute highest end intelligence. And in fact, maybe eventually they get there, but I think that's even besides the point. The open source models are somewhere in the 90 to 95% power level of the most powerful frontier AI. And they cost anywhere from 3% to 20% as much as the frontier models to run. So when something is an order of magnitude cheaper and almost the same in terms of power, people are going to definitely be interested in checking that out. So not having a model in that game was a major strategic gap for OpenAI. So that's the number one thing they were filling. There are other American AI companies that are trying to do open source. Obviously, there is Meta. They kind of had a whiff earlier this year with the Llama 4 release. You haven't heard a ton about it because it's not a great product. And so people aren't really widely adopting it. I suspect they're going to come back around in the fall sometime and have a Llama 5 that hopefully is dramatically better. But the broader idea that open source is important is really worth taking a moment to think about. Open source and open weights basically means that anyone can run these models on any hardware in any country. They can take the model and they can modify it by tuning it. They can use the model to produce outputs that are then used to train other models, which is an important part of distillation and the whole idea of model compression that's been happening for years. And a smaller model like the 20B variant that is still extremely powerful. It's a reasoning model with a high level of intellectual capability. It knows how to call tools. It knows how to act kind of as the brain of an agent, is a really exciting option to have available. Now, we've tested OSS 120B and OSS 20B, and they're competent models. They're similar to the Qwen models. So Qwen 3, which was released, I think, in April, it's a model from Alibaba, the Chinese giant. That Qwen model is very, very good. It's also a reasoning model, and it's been out there for a while. OSS 20 and 120 seem comparable to similar sized models or classes of models from Qwen. I don't see them as being better, but OpenAI has a horse in the race now. So that's my analysis of it. I'm really excited to see OpenAI in it, but I don't necessarily think there's an advantage to using OpenAI stuff over Qwen or some of the other open source options that are out there, at least at the moment.
Hmm. So my biggest question for you, which you kind of answered, was why is OpenAI entering this open arena in general and why now? And you kind of answered that. You said these open models have perhaps 90 to 95% of the level of power at a lower cost. I'm still struggling to understand though, like if we looked at GPT-5 Nano, which I'm not sure of the exact size of it, but I would assume it's quite small, why exactly does having it open source mean that it's a fraction of the cost?
Well, so essentially, when you're providing the full model and you're providing inference, so GPT-5 Nano or Mini, you're still OpenAI providing access to something that only you have access to. So if people want to come
Okay.
through that channel, there's an inherent kind of margin accretion that's happening to the provider in that scenario. Whereas at open source, in the world of the OSS 20 and 120B models, they're the exact same models. You can get them on Grok with a Q. You can get them on Cerebrus. You can get them through OpenRouter, through which you can get access to dozens of different inference providers. You can inference them on Azure and a whole bunch of other places, right? So it becomes more commoditized, which ultimately commoditization of any resource drives costs down. So that gets exciting because you know what you're going to get. So you could say, well, yeah, GPT-5 Mini is really similar to the Haiku model series from Claude, but it's not exactly the same. But OSS 20B, it's going to be the same everywhere. Assuming that it's not a quantized version, meaning it's the full size model, you're going to get OSS 20B performance exactly the same, whether it's on Grok or Cerebrus or Azure or through any number of other vendors through open routers. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there to drive costs down. And the further down and the closer we approach zero with the high level of intelligence, the better it is for everyone who's trying to deploy this stuff. The last thing I would say just really quickly is I do think open source from the country that you reside in is probably worth thinking about in terms of long term because these models are increasingly being used for thinking, for decision making, for writing, for providing advice. And so there's something to be thought about in terms of where does the model come from. So this isn't about does your data go to China, just to be clear. So if you use the Quen models from Alibaba and they're running on a US based cloud, your data is not going to China. That is actually kind of silly because, and I know that it doesn't sound silly to people who are like worried about it, but you can't put a backdoor into the software that's not detected immediately because there's all sorts of network infrastructure that would detect that, and it's open source. So we know exactly what the software is doing in terms of the actual algorithmic approach. The weights, of course, are still somewhat of a mystery to everyone. But we would know if the software was attempting to open a network connection. The weights can't do that by themselves. They have to be able to call tools in order to do that. So there really isn't a concern if you inference a Chinese model on US hardware that your data is going back to China. That's not really the legitimate issue. The issue, though, might be that you're worried about, well, what were the values and what was the content used to train the model? And so, therefore, when I'm getting advice from the model that was trained in China, did it include Western values? Did it include values that I align with? Will it help me? Will it help me make decisions? Will it help me write content? Will it help me with advice that I find is good relative to my culture? And so this is where I think there's a lot of opportunity around this idea of taking AI models and making AI models localized to a country or even a particular region so that the AI really reflects and honors the value system of that region and the people who live there. Now, that's really important for a consumer application of AI, of course, but I think it's also a geopolitical question as well. So that's one of the reasons you see a lot of people on the political stage making a big, big deal about open source and their country.
I was going to ask for our association listeners that are maybe in the process of building out some custom AI solutions. Do you recommend that for the power and cost analysis that they mainly look at open models to run? Or do you think there's value in looking at the closed models via API, I guess, for certain things like decision making?
I think there's scenarios where they both make sense. I think by default, what most people I know are doing is they're saying, "Hey, I'm going to sign up for an OpenAI API account, and I'm going to build my app against their stuff," just because that's what they've heard of, and it's the safe bet. It's like picking IBM in the 1960s through 80s. You didn't get fired for buying IBM, and so the same thing is kind of where OpenAI is going. So that's great for OpenAI. I think there's a lot of wasted money, and you get a substandard product a lot of the times. I know some associations that created apps that were based on GPT 3.5 back when GPT 3.5 was awesome. That, by the way, for those that don't recall, was the original model that ChatGPT launched on. So it was a pretty good model. But other models have come along since then that are a lot better. And so my point of view essentially is that you should be using models that suit your use case. And there's a ton of great models available through a lot of different providers that are really fast and are secure and ultimately are a better choice for a lot of applications. That being said, having access to this unbelievable frontier of AI through API and paying a little bit extra for it at times could make sense. But think of it as complementary. You can use a variety of different techniques to make it so that your software is agnostic and you can easily switch models and providers. That's a really important concept. We've talked about that a little bit on the pod in the past where you shouldn't directly hard code into your whatever you're building that it's only tied to OpenAI or Anthropic or anybody else for that matter. You should have essentially a layer of abstraction between the two so that you can more easily switch. And there's a number of ways to do that these days very easily.
And you kind of touched on this, Amith, but you don't sound as concerned about the higher hallucination rates because these aren't meant to be kind of these general knowledge assistants. Is that right? The open models, I mean.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about it in the case of the OSS 2120B models if they're used for what they were built for. They were used to be really good at tool calling. So there's other models that are out there that have much lower hallucination rates. And if you try to get them to invoke tool use, a lot of times they'll just ignore the tool. So for example, if I give another model that has a lower efficacy rate of tool calling, and I say, "Hey, I've got a tool that you can use to search the web. So whenever a user asks for something, use this tool." And always use this tool. And that model's adherence to those instructions may be substandard. It may use the tool sometimes and not use the tool at other times. If it thinks it has the answer, it might ignore the instruction in the system prompt to use the tool. Whereas the OSS 20 and 120B models were really, really dialed in to use tools as their first resort. And so they are focused not so much on the knowledge within the model, but rather to use the tools. So that's why for agentic use cases, OSS 20 and 120 should be really good. as I said, we find the Qwen 3 series to be excellent at tool calling and general knowledge and code generation and a variety of other things. So we're pretty big on them at the moment, but we don't get tied to any particular model for very long because there's always something new. If you're looking for a world-class code generation model, the Kimi K2 model from Moonshot AI is extraordinary. That's been out for about 3 weeks now. Much better than the OSS models at code generation. But OSS models are really good for a lot of the basic decision making that agents are doing all the time. So very useful. I'm very pleased to see OpenAI put them out there. And I think by virtue of the fact that it's an OpenAI model, it's going to get a lot of adoption. It'll probably very quickly become the number one model on Open Router on platforms like Grok and Cerebus just because it's OpenAI's model.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we'll see Anthropic follow suit soon with some open models?
Excellent question. I would love to see them do that. I don't know if they will. One really important thing to note is I think OpenAI's strategy is smart, is that they're not trying to give you like an older model that's not really that useful anymore and say, hey, we're in the open source game. They're actually trying to say, hey, like for open source and smaller models, this would be really useful along with our frontier proprietary models. And so build solutions with all of that, right? Whereas like Grok with a K, Elon Musk's X.AI, they're saying, oh, we're committed to open source too. We're going to give you the crap that we don't use anymore. So basically it's like Grok 3 is going to get open source, but Grok 3 is like completely out of date. So I don't know that there's any value to that. Plus, the model wasn't built to be open source. So even if you open source it, it's probably too big of a model for most people to run. So I'm not sure that's the most viable open source strategy just to check the box. So my suspicion would be that if Anthropic enters the game, which I think they probably, I think they should, whether they will or not is a great question. But I think there's a good chance they will. I suspect they do something similar, that they would have purpose-built models that they maintain in parallel with their frontier proprietary models for the purpose of what open source use cases, really makes sense. So I think open source is going to see a lot of interesting evolutions. We've got to remember we live in a global world, and there are players all over the place who have the ability to train these models, and that's going to get easier over time. Sam Altman said that it took a very small amount of resources to train the OSS models, and that would be true for a lot of other players that are out there that know how to do this and have access to the compute and have access to the training data, which is increasingly easy because the training data comes from other models more so than anything else at this point. So that means that we are going to see an even greater explosion of open models, more choice, more power. And a lot of people think that by the end of the year, Chinese open models will be as powerful, if not surpassing the capabilities of frontier proprietary models. So I don't know that I have a bet on that statement, but a lot of people are saying that. And I think, if you look at the trend line in terms of what's happening and how the Chinese ecosystem, they're building off of each other, I could see the argument for that. And even if it's not exactly as powerful, it's already extremely useful. And I think we need to pay attention to that.
For everybody that's still here with us at the end of this great OpenAI episode, Amith, what do you think is the one single takeaway?
Number one takeaway for me is go play with this stuff. You can hear us talk about it, and hopefully that's really helpful, but I think you should go and log into GPT-5 and try it out. If you're even a little bit technically inclined or technically curious, if you have a Mac, download something called LM Studio. It's a free piece of software that allows you on your Mac to very easily download models and play with them. It's got a ChatGPT-like interface. It's slightly more technical looking than that, but it allows you to do local inference. You can download a whole bunch of different models from different providers and check them out. And that's a fun way to kind of get a sense of what's happening. On the PC, I know you can do it as well, but I've switched to a Mac a few months ago, so I'm not sure if LM Studio is available for the PC or not. But I would definitely recommend, if you're a ChatGPT person, go in there and check it out if you haven't been in there in the last few days, and throw some things at it that you thought AI couldn't solve for you, right? That's what I always suggest when a big new model comes out, is think about something that didn't work 6 months or 12 months ago that you'd like to try again, or give it a bigger task, right? Maybe it's good at writing one article at a time, but to your earlier point, Mallory, could it write like an entire month's worth of articles that are all good? So I think there's just a lot of things you can do. And the best way to become really competent at AI is to go and play with AI, to use it.
Absolutely. Everybody, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. We will see you all next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sidecar Sync podcast. If you want to dive deeper into anything mentioned in this episode, please check out the links in our show notes.
And if you're looking for more in-depth AI education for you, your entire team, or your members, head to sidecar.ai.